Good evening, Sid. This is Frank. I got a small update on your block here. We did some work on it today. We got the old sleeves out completely just to make sure they were in good shape, and it turns out they are not. There's problems with both the block and the sleeves themselves. The sleeves are not too much of a problem, but the real concern is the block itself. So I'm going to go ahead and detail these little areas and tell you what I think, and we can mash heads and figure out what we want to do. Let me tip this thing forward so you can get a better view of it. So here we have the inside of the block, and if you can see in this area around here, there is a lot of corrosion. This was kind of hidden by the cylinder sleeve, and for as little as you indicate this thing ran, and as well as it looked externally, I was very surprised to see this kind of corrosion, especially going all the way to the bottom portion. I'm going to get a screwdriver and point out to you where this corrosion is and where the real problem is. Okay, Sid, you can see down into this area here. There's all sorts of corrosion in this area, and this area is right where the cylinder sleeve forms a jacket around this whole area here, with the cylinder sleeve resting on this top portion here. This area, there was a couple major problems. This area should have had a rubber O-ring around the sleeve. I'll show you in a little more detail where the actual sleeve, instead of an O-ring, they had a paper gasket down in this area. This area had no gasket. There's a large gasket that should encompass the whole top of the cylinder area, and that forms a jacket. The front cylinder sleeve is corroded, as bad as some of the corrosion I've ever seen, and I'm concerned that this area over here, some of the corrosion may be so deep and so flaky that it's actually going to break into the front portion of the case. If it's that thin, there's really no saving this case. This case will have to be junked, and we'll have to look for another case. This is also a very critical area. You can see it's very thin, and if it's badly corroded, it's almost impossible to get this lower portion where the cylinder sleeve goes to seal. I'm going to move over to the actual sleeve so you can see what that's all about. Okay, so this is the actual bottom portion of the sleeve. You can see in this area right here is where a paper gasket was sort of made and put into place, and it's just not adequate enough. I'm not really sure why they used a paper gasket, but you can see there's a huge amount of corrosion all over this sleeve, and this is junk. It was also bonded here to the top of the case, and there's actually a paper gasket that goes in there from the factory, and no paper gasket was used. It seems to have had some kind of epoxy, really hard epoxy, put in there to sort of try to seal the case, and that was just not a good solution. It obviously looks like it did hold water, but there was also some leakage, signs of leakage in a couple areas, so that's not good. So here, Sid, you can see the remnants of the paper gasket that was attached on the bottom. This was like a little flat handmade paper gasket that was around the bottom of these sleeves here, and paper is just not going to seal high pressure, or nor is it going to expand into that lip area. So it was just a bad solution that they addressed in the wrong way, and I think that led to the corrosion. there's such a level of corrosion here. This didn't occur in the time that you've owned the car. This has obviously occurred long prior with this particular engine. So unfortunately, that's just the way things are on the inside. That's the bad part. Here's the good part. Now for the good news. As you can tell, I have a spare set of liners, and these liners are in excellent condition. They have at best just a little bit of surface rust here. I'll just put a quick coat of paint on that, and you can see the area where the O-rings go is nice and true and flat and in excellent condition. They're standard bores, as were your others, but they're completely worn out, so they need to be overbored. But these are the liners I plan on taking to Honemasters and having them bore out to the pistons that Michael Ortman has provided. Let's take a quick... Okay, Sid, these are some critical areas that the crankshaft has some minor problems. We're going to try to address them the best we can. You can see here, this is a ring gear that has a small roller bearing setup inside, and there's 2 tiers of rollers that go in there. This fits up and over onto the crankshaft this way, and the surface that those rollers sit in is approximately right here. This surface is a little dimpled. What I might try to do is shim it ever so slightly on this end, so that this ring mechanism sits just a few thousandths out of this dimpled area, and hopefully that will give it a fresh area for this to ride on. It's not so bad, and I might be able to just polish it. There's a couple small grooved areas. The spline looks okay. The threads just need to be traced. When I took the crankshaft out previously, I may have noted that these holes, this one, and this one, are holes that the oil channels through the block and into these crank mains. There were no seals on these holes. There were also no seals provided for the camshafts. So that means that all the pressure coming out of the oil pump was not being contained within the inner workings of the engine. This would have eventually just caused a catastrophic failure and may have been the root cause to the lifter failing. With all these oil channels not sealed properly within the engine, oil pressure could not push up to the highest areas of the engine, and that may have been why the lifters died prematurely, from lack of a constant spray of oil. I'm not really sure. What I can tell you is, in your toolage, the time that you've had this car, this amount of varnish on the crankshaft would have never occurred. So the previous person who put this engine together, unfortunately, did not exercise very good care of getting things very clean. It's just, I really have to reaffirm that it looks like this thing was patched together just to get sold, with a lot of parts missing internally. It's a sad state of affairs, but that's kind of the way things were. Here you can see the pistons. There's a little bit of scuffing on this side of the pistons, with a lot of blow-by on the edges, and you can see a lot of blow-by on the sides where the rings had just completely lost the ability to seal the combustion chamber, and that was causing probably a loss of power and a lot of smoking at one point. So we're going to attempt to rectify all these things. My big concern for the evening is, of course, the actual block itself. The good part about that is I do have a spare upper block, and I'm thinking it's better to err on the side of caution and reassemble it with a block that does not have the rust and the corrosion on the inside.